Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Six Celebrate Tour Historic Affordable Housing in Sunnyside Gardens, Jackson Heights, and Woodside. I'm sure you all know who HDC is, but if you don't know us, the Historic Districts Council is the citywide advocate for New York's historic neighborhoods. We work with more than 500 communities across the city to help preserve and celebrate the places that matter to them. Today's tour is part of HDC's program Six Celebrate. The purpose of Six to Celebrate is to provide strategic resources to neighborhood groups at a critical moment to reach their preservation goals. The six elected groups receive HDC's hands-on help in all aspects of their efforts over the course of the year and continued support in the years to come. HDC and Queens Community Board 2 have launched a Sunnyside Landmark Survey, which asks for your help to identify, preserve, and celebrate what has helped make Sunnyside a home and community and cultural life for the past century. The findings of this survey will help HGC and QCB2 create a list of advocacy priorities to share with local elected officials, the LPC, and other agencies and organizations. I will be putting links to both the English and Spanish surveys in the chat. Six to Celebrate is supported in part by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York City Council, and the New York State Council on the Arts. If you like our programming, we hope that you will support us as well. Our upcoming events include an in-person tour of Central Harlem on November 8th and our annual gala honoring Morris Adjemi on November 14th. Information about our upcoming programming can be found on our website, hdc.org. If you have any questions about programming, you can contact me at marbulu@hdc.org. I'm going to put the links in the chat now, and then I will hand it over to Jason Antos to lead tonight's tour. Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you very much, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. And thank you to Historic Districts Council for hosting this program tonight on the history of Sunnyside, Woodside, Jackson Heights, and the affordable housing movement and its legacy and its future here in the borough of Queens. Just a little bit about myself. Before we start, I am currently the executive director at the Queens Historical Society, and which is located at the Kingsland Homestead here in Flushing. We are located in a 250-year-old homestead. It's one of the last remaining British colonial homesteads in the borough of Queens, and probably the only standing example of what was known as a Long Island half house. And as I mentioned, we are in the Weeping Beach Park off of Northern Boulevard and Parsons Boulevard, and we're open Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so for those of you interested in exploring a greater aspect of Queens history and even Flushing history, we invite you guys to come down to the Kingsland Homestead, which is also the first landmark structure in the borough of Queens. And currently, I was appointed, also I have the honor of being appointed as the current official Queensborough historian. And so without further ado, I'd like to take you on this very brief journey because, you know, we could talk about when it comes to local history, Queens history, the neighborhood's history, we could talk about these things all day. And I love to talk about them all day. So we'll do a little concise history about where Woodside and Sunnyside and Jackson Heights come from, how they started, and their impact on the lives of thousands of people over the past 100 years plus. So to begin with, well, the best places to start is at the beginning, of course. We all know that New York was once part of Dutch rule, and then it transferred to British rule, and then it became an part of New York City and part of the greater independent nation of the United States. But what was Queens like before the founding of our great nation, before the time of the British? During the time of the Dutch, it had no official title. It was simply known as the Outer Plantation. Of course, the seat of power for the Dutch was Manhattan, or New Amsterdam, and the colony was, of course, New Netherland. The area was split up among several Native American groups, most of them of which were Lenni Lenape speaking peoples of the greater Algonquin Nation. We have Native American place names, as we call them, still in existence to this very day. Jamaica, Queens, for example, is the word Yamako. Um, Yamako, which means place of the beaver pelt. And of course, we have Matinecock. Matinecock was the North Shore of Long Island. And this was not specifically the name of the tribe. These names were what the indigenous peoples applied to the land. So Matinecock means the place of the rolling hills and or the hunting place, etc. But when we get into Western Queens, we have another name, and the name is Mashpet or Maspeth. And Mashpet, originally there was a controversy of of the meaning of the word was. The original meaning or thought it was meaning was place of dirty or stagnant water. But it has been confirmed in recent decades as the place where the tidal river flows, obviously referring to the Newtown Creek. Life began along the waterfront. So you have Flushing Bay, Flushing River, the Newtown Creek, Long Island Sound, and of course the East River. And this is where the majority of the indigenous peoples lived. That's where they hunted and fished, etc. One of the settlements was actually here in Flushing, not too far from where I'm sitting right now in Kingsland Homestead, was located right off of the Northern Boulevard and Prince Street, just outside of downtown Flushing. So the original settlement was known as the Maspeth settlement, all right, or the Maspeth patent. And I guess you could say that as we examine the history of Woodside and Sunnyside and housing and affordable housing, et cetera, we see that during the arc of history of Queens County, that it was always about a place to live, a place to settle, who will live where and how, whether it be the indigenous population, who of course was moved off of their land either by force or by purchase or by trade, whether it was the coming of the British who settled here and bought up numerous acreage because they descended from Connecticut and Massachusetts colony, to the coming of immigrants in the 1800s and the establishment of businesses and townships, etc. Queens, there's always been a battle in the borough of Queens of a place to live, a place to call home. The Native Americans, the Lenni Lenape, who inhabited the land, as I mentioned, were pushed out off of their land by force and also by manner of trade. So, for example, in Little Neck, Queens, on the Nassau border, in the 1660s, the Thomas Hicks, names who his descendants would be the settlers of Hicksville in Long Island, basically dealt the Matinecock a deadly blow and pushed them off of their land by force and by violence. In other situations, you had British people coming from New England colony into, or Massachusetts or Connecticut colony, I should say, into Long Island, and instead of moving by force, would simply purchase land from the Native Americans. The jurisdiction of the Dutch did not extend really beyond Flushing. Flushing is kind of like where their sphere of interest, let's call it, ended. And because at that time, as we said, it was called the Outer Plantation, so much of Queens was barren and it was pretty much up for grabs. One of the main reasons why the Dutch did not live in Queens or in mass beyond Long Island City was primarily because of their inability to negotiate and trade with the Native Americans. The British had a lot more success, primarily in the sense of their ability to understand each other's ways. They learned Lene Lenape language. This is the British we're talking about, learned local Native American dialect for the sake of trading and for the sake of keeping the peace. And the just the overall relationship between the British and the natives was a lot different. The dynamic was different versus the relationship that the indigenous population had with the Dutch. So it came to no surprise that during the 1640s, um, that one of the first English arrivals came to the area. That was the Reverend Francis Doherty, who bought thousands of acres in Western Queens in the hopes of establishing a religious colony. And sure enough, and the Dutch authorities in Manhattan were very pleased to sell him the land because nobody dared live out here in the outer plantation. And sooner or later, you had a situation where the amount of British settlers in Long Island and in Queens began to rival the number of Dutch. And then, of course, there was the bloodless, transfer of power from Dutch colony to British colony. So, and that, of course, is a whole story in and of itself. But as when the British came, they seized upon spreading the population, and they took advantage of establishing a greater sphere of influence of what was now their realm. Okay. And it was in 1683 that Queens, or what we call today Queens, was reorganized and basically reorganized into townships, boroughs, and shires, basically based on the city planning system of the British. And Queens finally, around this time, or slightly earlier, first of all, it went from the outer plantation, and it was known as Hastings. And then after Hastings, known as the West Riding of Yorkshire. And then from Yorkshire, it evolved into Queens. Legend has it that it was named in honor of Queen Catherine of Braganza, the wife of King Charles II. But this is a theory. We believe that it was named in honor of her royal position, let's say, for you would not necessarily name a place after someone who was still alive. So this was probably a marketing decision by the British authorities here in New York to kind of kiss up to the crown, so to speak, to show that there is a county named after the Queen and a county named after the King, i.e. Brooklyn. And so even in the early days of the colony, marketing for greater support of real estate and growth was very much a thing on people's minds. So this is a very crude map, of course, of what the area looked like. To give you perspective, you have Manhattan Island on the lower left, the East River, and this is basically a map that goes north to south, east, west. You have the Newtown Creek. You have the original some of the earliest settlers. You have Richard Brutnall. You have William Hallett, as in Hallett's Cove in Astoria, and then my all-time favorite colonial character, which was Jorison, the Burgomeister, who lived in Queens Plaza at the base of what would be today the Queens Borough Bridge, and his gristmill stones still exist in a park at the base of the bridge across from the JetBlue building. So jumping ahead about 150 years, this is a map by James Riker Jr. He is the author of the Annals of Newtown. And this is a very beautifully detailed map showing Newtown. So to explain, once the British spread their influence and reorganized Queens from basically a desolate outpost of just prairies and swamps and bogs and tree-covered hills, you could see that it has been very much organized into somewhat of of an area where people live. You see meandering roads. You do see the names of towns. You do see more so the property owners, or written all over the face of the map. But also, just if you draw your attention from to the lower part of the map, the lower left, you see Williamsburg. And if you look at Williamsburg in comparison to the rest of Queens, Williamsburg is very developed, and that's why you can see it has a gridded street system, where Queens is very open. And the land, the territory is very wild. It's completely, marbled with swamps and streams and meandering creeks and bogs, and wooded areas that give way to low swampland, and it's a very wild terrain, amongst which lives thousands of people and property owners. And of course, there's probably one major thoroughfare to the north, and then the rest of it is just meandering roadways and byways. But such was the case in the 1850s in Queens. You had a lot of British, French Huguenot, and Dutch settlers, also German people coming into what is now a county of Greater New York City, or the Greater New York, let's say the metropolitan area. Queens, of course, would become an official borough of New York City in 1898. But one of the things that established these neighborhoods was farming, but also basically, if you weren't a working farm or just a self-sustaining farm, a lot of the open land was purchased, believe it or not, by companies. Towns in Queens, some of which did not have a name, which basically was just part of the greater township, began to see small patches of industry established. And then with the establishment of the factory or the industry came the town. And so you had towns that were basically farming towns with dirt roads and foot trails. And then you had these small pockets of industry. And it was with this establishment of these small industrial ventures, let's say, these enterprises, that the company would kind of further develop the neighborhood by creating a grid system, some sort of manageable street system, blocks and lots, etc., housing for employees, and also, if their influence was great enough, to convince the railroad to come to their area. If you notice in the middle of the map, to the left, you have just off of the East River is Dutch Kills, and then after that is the Trains. Is the Trains Meadow. Trains Meadow comes from the Drains Meadow. It was a meadow that during the tidal shift, the water would rise and would fall. And this area, as Trains Meadow, would later become Jackson Heights. To the west of it is a town called Middleton, because of its location in between Western Queens and Greater Newtown. Newtown, of course, also went through several identities. Of course, it was known prior to that as Middleburg, and then after that, the British settlers did away with that name and decided to create a new town, which was a very common concept of when a new territory was started. It would be called Newtown. So it became one of the original townships of the borough of Queens. You have, of course, Newtown Township, Jamaica Township, and then east of the Flushing River is Flushing Township. So these areas were they were popular. By the eve of the Civil War is when the population in Queens increased. You had many settlers coming here looking to establish homesteads, looking to establish farms. And as I said, because there was a lot of open land, you had people coming in to establish business enterprise by the way of heavy or light manufacturing. And at around this time, as we move into 1869, is when the first form of major development happens, when the first concept of communities really takes hold. You had different villages within each township. For example, in Newtown, you had Newtown proper, which is where today's Elmhurst is, at like Broadway and Queens Boulevard. In Woodside, you had Winfield, which was created before Woodside, and that is because it was the area where the casket manufacturer was. There was a documentary several years ago called The Woman in the Iron Coffin, and it was where Fisk's Iron Coffin Makers was located. And they established the neighborhood of Winfield and created housing for employees, created a couple of main thoroughfares that would allow for wagons to bring and to arrive and depart with goods from their factory. And that was one of the earliest examples of a town or an establishment of a town. But this was about to explode on a bigger scale. In the 1860s, the concept of real estate was virtually unknown in this country, specifically in outside of Manhattan, let's say. A lot of the homesteads that you would have seen in Queens in the days or years after the Civil War were basically wooden or stone-made homesteads and mansions and estates that dotted the landscape, and all of them were hand-me-downs. They were purchased. The land was purchased 100 years before a homestead was erected, and basically the size of the building or the domicile grew with the size of the family, and that was basically it. And the property belonged to one or two families who commanded numerous amounts of acreage all around their property. And sometimes these homes would be occupied, and sometimes they would be vacant. But regardless of whether they were occupied or vacant, they were still owned by the landowner, by the descendant of the family who had established themselves there at least 100, 150 years earlier. And into this crazy world of, pop-up factories and homesteads and land, and this is my property line and that's your property line, and this I wouldn't say chaotic, but just wild system of establishing one's home and one's property along a terrain that was very unforgiving, enters the very mysterious individual known as Benjamin W. Hitchcock. Well, who was he? Well, this is the gentleman who brings the idea of modern day housing and also the method in which to pay for this housing into American life, and more specifically, into the life of people who live in Queens. So to begin with, and I'm going to read a copy from, I have a publication coming out in a few months on the history of Sunnyside and Woodside. I'm going to read to you from my text that I wrote for the introduction of Benjamin Hitchcock. And his life is very mysterious. There's no known photographs or etchings of him. He, when he died in the early 1900s, his obituary in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle was literally 50 to 60 words. And so he was we know that he was an Englishman that had immigrated at a young age to the United States. And he was basically a person who was, in a cruder sense, a hustler, but a hustler who wanted to make money but yet leave an impact on, wherever he went. He was a showman. He was a real estate agent. He was a property manager. He was a maker of towns and villages, and even at one, he owned a music company. He even at one time was the president of the American Playing Card Company, who attempted, and not successfully though, to outlaw the image of kings and queens on playing cards because he felt that that was very un-American and pro-British. So he wanted to redo the concept of card playing, and instead of having a joker or a king or a queen, to be replaced with presidents and heads of and famous governors around the country, thinking it would be a more patriotic image. But of course, we still have kings and queens and jacks when we play cards. But the early life of Benjamin W. Hitchcock is mysterious. His professional life, on the other hand, is extensive. Hitchcock was a showman for sure, and his real estate prospects were exploitive. There was no territory in New York, or even the country for that matter, where Hitchcock didn't have some kind of scheme going. A publisher of sheet music, Hitchcock hailed from the upstate region of New York, and his family, and I had mentioned England, I'm sorry, and his family came from British descent. His sheet music business ran successfully for more than 35 years, beginning in 1852, from his showroom where he also sold books, musical instruments, printing presses, and movable type. The showroom was located at 24 Beekman Street in Manhattan. And then from 1862 to 1864, he was the president of the American Playing Card Company. Selling real estate was a new phenomenon, and it was conducted with few regulations. When Hitchcock arrived on the scene in the late 1860s, the population of Queens was approximately 30,000 people. All right. And by 19, and that was in the 1860s. And within 70 years, it grew from that number to 1.1 million people. All right. At first, Hitchcock tested the waters with a few minor real estate deals in Brooklyn, and these were moderately successful, but he was kind of in awe at how much money could be made from this thing called real estate. And then he really he threw himself totally into the real estate game. And it was in 1867 when he crossed the Newtown Creek into Queens and began prospecting. The first neighborhood he encountered was the established neighborhood of or village of Winfield, where Fisk's metal casket maker company was in existence. But he traveled further north, and Hitchcock came about some desolate homesteads, some which he saw were vacated and some that were occupied. And one of the first people that Hitchcock encountered was a gentleman by the name of Gabriel Marc, who was a native of Normandy, France. And he had purchased property in Woodside a few years before, during the time of the Civil War. His property was located along, we had mentioned Trains Meadow, but in the Woodside area, there was a territory called the Narrow Passage or Wolf Swamp, which was a major which was a major geographical advantage for British troops during the Revolutionary War. But it is amazing to note that the Narrow Passage and the Wolf Swamp was located where Woodside Avenue and Northern Boulevard is situated today. And it was around this area that Gabriel Marc and his family lived, on a huge swath of property. And Mr. Hitchcock approached him and told him about this concept of buying property from people like Mr. Marc, and then flipping the land into a place where multiple families could live, and compared the idea to what was going on in the industrial zones in Brooklyn or in Manhattan. And I'm sure that the Marc family was rather mystified by this, considering that Queens at this time was a very, very aggressively agrarian area, full of farms, and like I said, pockets of industry. But nonetheless, Hitchcock was successful in convincing Mark to sell his property for a lot of money. Okay, and these property purchases were known as tracts, TRACT, as tracts. And basically, each tract was a family tract. So you had the Mark family or homestead tract. You had the Sackett family, another original family to what would become Woodside. Hitchcock was successful in purchasing that property, that entire farm homestead as well, and it became known as the Sackett and Kelly tract. So, and one of the gimmicks that Hitchcock used was that he promised that whoever sold him the property, there would be streets and avenues that would bear the name of the family. All right. And that's why we have names, street names in Queens that bear the name of certain families. But it also created something else. It created a chaotic street system in which, as you went from neighborhood to neighborhood and from township to township, the street name and numbering system would reset itself and start anew. Okay. And had to be in by the time of the 20th century, when the modern day numbering system was adopted, it caused the city engineers and the Topographical Bureau to rewrite the map of Queens 2 times over. And I believe it's still evolving from that time as well. All right. But Hitchcock, because, and it says in this map, Hitchcock's plan for homes at Woodside, Queens County, Long Island, along the Long Island Railroad, which at that time, due to business interests further north in Whitestone and College Point, you had Conrad Poppenhusen and John Locke in Whitestone. Conrad Poppenhusen was the president and owner of the American Hard Rubber Corporation, and John Locke in Whitestone, where I live, was the owner of Locke's stamping mill. Stamping, for those of you who don't know, is when you walk into, let's say, a beautiful establishment or home, and you look at the ceiling and you see those beautiful squares and the molding along the perimeter of the ceiling where it meets the wall. That and the mosaic, that design is known as stamping, and that came out of Whitestone. And around this time that Hitchcock arrived in Queens, the Poppenhusen and Leggett had established, along with influence from the Long Island Railroad, and this branches off into a whole nother story for another day, to create what was known as the Flushing and Woodside Railroad, and also the Flushing and Northside Railroad, which ran its tracks through Woodside. So there was the transportation option that was there for Hitchcock to take advantage of as well. So in this map from 1870-71, you see Hitchcock's plan for homes at Woodside. This is another very interesting broadside that says Hitchcock's second plan, homes for the people at West Flushing. Secure a home by paying only $10 a month. And this is it. This is one of the first announcements of what he called the installment plan, and is what we know today as a mortgage. Imagine, look at, just really examine the details of this broadside. $10 a month, all right, nearly 1,000 lots in the village of Woodside, Long Island. And he's also now, he calls it the second plan for homes at West Flushing. West Flushing, we know it today as Corona. In 1854, another developer had come to the area, had beaten Hitchcock to the area by a decade and a half, and tried to do something similar that was going, and tried to do a similar venture, but went about it in a totally different manner, and the entire project fell apart. But certain area farms had already been bought out, and areas had been blocked and lotted. But the method in which homes would be built or sold was completely different from Hitchcock's plan, and therefore it was just known simply as West Flushing, but nobody lived there. So Hitchcock, when he went to the area, he saw that there was kind of a ready-made situation in the area with streets and blocks and lots. And basically, his concept was we will, and it says on the bottom, Benjamin W. Hitchcock, music publisher. All right. And so with this concept, the price of each corner lot is $350 and all other lots $300. And with this concept, Hitchcock introduced the installment plan, or what we call the mortgage. Affordable living, all right, was at hand. And the ultimate concept was not so much the installment plan, but it was the concept of purchasing a ready-made home. See, it doesn't say secure property or acreage by paying only. It says secure a home by paying only $10 a month. So this was a very new thing, because you weren't buying the block and lot. You were buying a ready-made home on the property. And this was a very, very new thing, okay, in the world of housing in the United States, especially in New York. So Hitchcock develops Woodside. He develops Corona. He develops West Flushing into Corona, and he's on a roll. He's making a lot of money. He also helps co-found the neighborhood of Union Course, or what would become Woodhaven. And now Hitchcock is making a lot of money. All right, he's become very successful, and he's kind of monopolized this new real estate game that's going on here in New York. But with any sort of success, there is always a competitor. And sure enough, within a few years, he does get competitors. Their names are also something that you come across when doing research on Queens and Long Island history, and even Brooklyn history, and that would be Hitchcock's direct competitor was a man by the name of Jeremiah Johnson, not to be confused with the outdoorsman pioneer that was portrayed by Robert Redford. This is another Jeremiah Johnson, who owned Jeremiah Johnson Jr.'s real estate company. And he was always in competition with Benjamin Hitchcock. And even so, in this map showing Maspeth and lots to sell in that part of Newtown, this is from 1880. It says on the map, the font is maybe too small to read. It says, "No free lunch on cheap fish and chowder. No brass band or any fictitious bidding at auction." And this is a direct stab at Hitchcock, who, when he would sell off his blocks and lots, would have a huge brass band and a big display of food and goodies for everyone. He would provide a complimentary passage on the Long Island Railroad to access the area. He would provide free transportation via horse-drawn trolley or stagecoach to get to the area. And he was very much into gimmicks. And also with the biggest gimmick was that if you sold the property to him, once he flipped it, he would do the street system in honor of your family and people in your family, in terms of naming the streets after them. Just to show you how bad the competition got at one time, hold on a second. Competition got so bad was that homesteads, this is also from copy from my book, competition was fierce as the vacant lots and abandoned homesteads of the great metropolis were now up for grabs, and the money was pouring in. This would sometime lead to petty displays of competition. And in 1888, Jeremiah Johnson, owner of perhaps the largest and most well-known real estate agency in Brooklyn and Queens, sued Benjamin Hitchcock, claiming that he had stolen Johnson's famous company logo, an American flag surrounded by stars. Hitchcock was now seen using it in his real estate advertisements in newspapers and brochures. In court, he argued that he did not steal Johnson's logo and that, after all, his was totally different. It had one star less than Johnson's logo. Hitchcock was found guilty and ordered, of course, to stop using the logo immediately. So once these neighborhoods were established, as I mentioned, you now have a phasing out of the farmland in Queens. By the really by the end of the Victorian era, you have this new concept of real estate is taking hold. The farmlands are being bought, being sold off at a rapid rate, primarily because the amount of money that is offered to these families is so great. And a lot of these families were living, some of them were well off, but a lot of them by this point were not, I wouldn't call them destitute, but they were not living their best life, let's just say. In fact, in the 1920s, when the Queens Topographical Bureau was doing the modern day street system in Queens, when their engineers went through the borough, they still found pockets of people of areas where people lived in wooden or brick or stone houses without electricity, running water, or modern day conveniences, or let's say an indoor bathroom, indoor kitchen, etc. So, but by the 1880s, 1890s, the housing boom begins. The homesteads transition into blocks and lots, and from that point on, you start to see new types of housing and new types of business phenomena begin to appear, such as roadhouses and bars and saloons. And the reason for this is because these communities, they need active thoroughfares where transportation will cut through. This is a beautiful photograph of looking south on the Woodside Avenue towards Jackson Avenue in 1899. The cross street is Northern Boulevard, and in the left, you see the beautiful trolley barns of the Queens County Railway, which are still standing. Those two towers and the midsection, the wraparound, the waiting room, still stands there today at the corner of Woodside and Northern Boulevard. So transportation becomes a major factor, and everything complements the other. The transportation brings people to the neighborhood, which increases the amount of prospective buyers. Thus the population increases. As the population increases, there is a higher demand for local goods and services, and the increase in goods and services allows people to make money, and thus more property is purchased and more houses built, and it becomes this ecosystem of development. All right, totally unseen in the borough of Queens, just 25 years, 30 years earlier from the time that this photo was taken. It shows you, look at the transition. This is 1899, and this is the 1870s. This is just 30 years earlier. And this is a pastoral scene in Winfield on the road from Long Island City that was known as the Hurlgate Road. These are ancient thoroughfares and byways that used to cut through the borough of Queens. The Hurlgate Road also, because a lot of them were not in a straight line, they were meandering. Certain parts of the road, even if it still exists today, is known as something else. In other words, as it meanders, it'll become this road and that road, and it'll change designation every so often. But the Hurlgate Road became Hallett's Cove Road, and then it became Woodside Avenue. So this is roughly the same scene from here to here, okay? Or the same location, I should say. All right, as we move along, just being aware of the time. So how did Woodside get its name? Well, this is the namesake of Woodside. This is John A.F. Kelly, who built his homestead, which was an enlargement of the Sackett homestead. Sacketts were one of the founding families in Woodside, and he named his estate Woodside because it was located well in the middle of the woods. But he was also the publisher of the Brooklyn Times, a newspaper that he owned along with his sister. And he had a column that would appear in each issue of the paper known as Letters from the Woodside. And it had amusing anecdotes about the colorful characters and shenanigans that went on in the backwoods of what became Woodside. And there's the Kelly Homestead, 57th Street and Woodside Avenue. So another major leap and this is really awesome that we have this image, another big leap for the development of Woodside and also Sunnyside and also Jackson Heights was the establishment of the Hunters Point, Newtown, and Flushing Turnpike. And it was actually established by this gentleman, John C. Jackson, all right, Englishman and Woodside resident. And he was an engineer, a farmer, etc. And he helped establish the Hunters Point, Newtown, and Flushing Turnpike Association. And this was a group of concerned citizens who pooled their money, their resources, and in some cases, their experience in engineering to create a new and exciting thoroughfare that would take people from the ferry point of entry in Long Island City, which was at the foot of Borden Avenue, and where the Long Island Railroad stations were located, and connect them with Greater Queens and out into what would become Nassau, all the way to Suffolk County. And of course, since this gentleman, John C. Jackson, spearheaded this effort, the street was named Jackson Avenue in his honor. And that is obviously today Northern Boulevard. It's still called Jackson Avenue. Once you go west of the courthouse, east of the courthouse, it becomes, or east of Queens Plaza, Jackson Avenue becomes Northern Boulevard. But John C. Jackson is where the name Jackson Heights comes from. People think it's named after President Jackson, Andrew Jackson, but it is not. The name of the neighborhood comes from John C. Jackson, who was the founder of Jackson Avenue, aka Northern Boulevard. So, and Jackson lived where the Woodside Houses apartment complex is located today, just just north of the Northern Boulevard, just off of Woodside Avenue. That's where John C. Jackson's homestead was situated, and that is where the Woodside Houses are located today. So Woodside sets the stage for early home ownership and works as the blueprint of not just home ownership, but affordable home ownership. And in fact, this trend continued all the way until the 1920s. Basically, if you drove through Queens at any time during the 1920s, if you were lucky enough to have a car or navigate the really treacherous roadways, because the surface was not that even or in good quality, you would see billboards that basically said, "Why rent when you can buy?" The concept of renting, and it was interesting to note that the concept of renting was being phased out in favor of affordable home ownership. Why rent when you can buy? So this is a picture. So that is the story of Woodside. All right. And now, so and also Corona. So the blueprint has been established, and now we move into Sunnyside. Well, Sunnyside is a little bit of somewhat of a different story. Here is a picture of Sunnyside as it looked in 1899. Isn't this incredible? This is one of my favorite photographs of old Queens. And we're looking at the pond that was an offshoot of the Dutch Kills, all right, going through this beautiful, pristine meadow. And you see PS3 up on the hillside to the right. And again, like Woodside, the name of Sunnyside comes from one of the homesteads located in the area. It comes from the Borough estate, who named his property Sunnyside Hill. Basically, John Borough, Bragaw, called his homestead Sunnyside Hill. And it was on a 60-foot hill not too far from where LaGuardia, LaGuardia College is located today. And that is one of the interesting things to note is that the original Sunnyside, and I notice how the photo says original village of Sunnyside, was located where the Sunnyside Yards is today. So the physical location of the neighborhood was moved. But we'll get to that in a few minutes. So so the development of Sunnyside, or the transition from one Sunnyside to another, came by way of the Pennsylvania Railroad, who purchased all of this property to establish the Sunnyside Yards. The way that the homesteaders in this situation were seduced, I should say, or finessed to give up their land or to sell their land came in 1909, when three young women, professionally dressed, descended upon the area and went door to door asking these homesteaders living in these wooden homes of either wood or clay or stone, if they were interested in selling their property for a large sum of money. And the homesteaders asked, who these women were, and they said, well, we represent a real estate company, and we own, in fact, they went so far to say that they owned the real estate company and that they were, young entrepreneurs trying to make their name in this real estate industry. And a lot of the homesteaders were intrigued, but they were somewhat suspicious. But still, after some urging, the property owners gave in and sold off their property to these individuals. Little did they know that these women were employees of the Pennsylvania Railroad and were disguised, they were real estate agents, but they were representing the real estate holding of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And they had basically introduced themselves as independent real estate brokers, not because they figured if the village or the townsfolk of Old Sunnyside heard that a railroad was coming in to displace them, that would cause a lot of pushback. Well, it did. Word got out that a railroad was coming to town and that the railroad was coming and the people were going. And this was not met. This was met with small resistance, which held up the project for a little while. But by 1910, everything was in full swing, and the Pennsylvania Railroad was purchasing pretty much everything in sight. Pretty much everything in sight, including parts of Long Island City, Astoria, all the way through where Sunnyside Gardens is located today, almost up to the Jackson Heights border. The Pennsylvania Railroad just bought everything, not knowing exactly how extensive the yard would be or how big their footprint would become. So the name of Sunnyside originates from the Borough homestead, Sunnyside Hill, and then here is the a rather damaged photo, but it's the only one we have, of the Sunnyside Hotel and Roadhouse, which was situated on Northern Boulevard, 1 mile east of Queens Plaza. And the Sunnyside Hotel was, of course, named in honor of the Sunnyside Hill estate, which everyone in the community knew about. And it was so the origin of Sunnyside comes from the saloon and also the homestead. As we move into the early 20th century, now the ancient village of Sunnyside has been removed, and there is development now along Queens Boulevard, as you can see. And this is the coming of the IRT and the BMT. This is the dual contract subway system. The IRT purchased a lot of property from the Pennsylvania Railroad to establish their footprint, and had bought a lot of property around the area, and in order to create this elevated trestle that goes along Queens Boulevard and then splits and goes down the Roosevelt Avenue heading towards progressively towards Flushing. All right, in the distance on the horizon, you could see the coming of Jackson Heights, and also the earlier generation of the, or what I would say, an early phase of the second generation of Sunnyside. And this is for the residents of Sunnyside. This right here is a beautiful photo of the trolley station of the Manhattan and Brooklyn Trolley Company. And this trolley station is where the Sunnyside Arcade is located today, that big, beautiful metallic sign that has Sunnyside written out. And that's where the Bix Beiderbecke concert is held every year. Well, that's right there, right where this trolley station was located. So Sunnyside again has its origins, different in the affordable housing era. It is by this time Benjamin Hitchcock and his competitors are long gone, and the concept of owning property at a cheap rate goes now into garden apartments, owning an apartment at an affordable rate. Affordability is the name of the game because it attracts the most people. So it was the two main functions that drove the growing of the community, was affordability and also transportation. And here we see that from, this is such a difference from 1915 to 1929. We're here on the eve of the stock market crash. And here we have Queens Boulevard and the IRT-7 train. And you see rows and rows of shops and businesses and establishments already there. And it's almost very reminiscent of a scene from today, except the clothing is different and the cars are different. But you could feel that the energy is very equal to what you would find today in Sunnyside. Just moving along, because I know we got short time. This is an aerial view of the Sunnyside Gardens. And this is, of course, another masterwork in affordable housing in New York City, something that set the template and the blueprint for what affordable housing and safe and comfortable surroundings could be like. Jackson Heights also fun. This is Woodside as well. So, but one of the things that is different from from Sunnyside and Woodside is Jackson Heights. Now, Jackson Heights is a little bit different. This is where we're going to kind of wrap it up. Jackson Heights was purchased out of the 325-acre Barclay Dugrow tract, which was the former Trains Meadow. And it was started by this gentleman, Edward A. McDougall, who owned the Queensboro Corporation. And McDougall, his vision was a little bit different. Unlike Hitchcock and the developers of Sunnyside Gardens, his vision was not so much affordable housing, but kind of high-end garden apartments that had and was its own self-sustained community with operating farms, with community vegetable gardens, with tennis courts and golf courses, community theaters, churches and schools, and also transportation that all would service the Jackson Heights community. Basically, he envisioned a colony where people would live in beautiful appointed apartments in apartment houses designed by the top architects. But unlike Sunnyside Gardens and also Woodside, Jackson Heights began as a restricted community. We actually have a brochure here at Queens Historical Society in the archives that says that if you buy an apartment in Jackson Heights, you'll be living with those people who you wish to associate with. And this, of course, is very soft language for saying, you know who's allowed and you know who's not allowed. And of course, as most restricted neighborhoods in Queens, their destiny, once they became unrestricted, it is no irony that they became some of the most culturally diverse neighborhoods in what is now the most culturally diverse area in probably the world. And here is a picture of this sort of modern day lifestyle that Sunnyside Gardens in Jackson Heights promoted, where it was a healthy living for families. You could raise your kids here. They can go to school here. They can shop here. They can grow their vegetables here. They can recreate themselves with various tennis courts and squash courts and golf courses. And it's like almost like the concept of a colony, where everything you need and all wants satisfied in the confines of the community, and also providing an adequate place to live for those who worked in Manhattan, who now no longer needed to worry about living in Brooklyn or Manhattan, which was super overpopulated. They could move to the vast open area of Queens and live in one of these beautifully designed apartment buildings that were surrounded by beautiful open lands and community gardens, and would probably never be more developed than you see right now. Well, of course, this is totally the opposite. And of course, the early concepts of these neighborhoods progressed into morphed into something different as time goes by. Demand for housing is different, affordability is different, and the whole model for living is different. But these were the origins of these neighborhoods and what they hope to accomplish. And I thank you for joining me, and I'm sorry, if I want to really focus a little bit more also on the origin of the neighborhood and where all of this comes from, because the origins gave way to the communities themselves, and then into the concept of the community, which gives way to the modern day. So I want to take you on that arc, and I thank you for hosting me tonight, and thank you.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting. Does anyone have any questions? Well, great. There's a lot of people saying thank you. And
Okay, great.
since it is after 7 already, I think we'll just say good night. But yes, thank you, Jason, very much. This was fantastic. As everyone can see, this was recorded. So it will be available on our YouTube channel along with our other tours and preservation school classes, also our conference panels. So if you've not checked that out, please go do so. We have a lot of content on there. And like I said, if you need to contact me about anything, you can do so. If you want to get in contact with Jason, just let me know. And yes, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Have a good night.
Okay, great. Thank you.